Councillor Andrew Garrett. I'm the chair of the Audit Committee. To my right is the Vice Chair, Councillor Lilly. In attendance, we have members of the committee, officers, members of staff. We also have Councillor Jarman, who attends as the Cabinet member, with much oversight in this area. And online at the moment, we have Jason and Helen from Ernst & Young. Claire Shand is joining us remotely. Megan and Sarah are jointly servicing the committee because Megan has to be working from home. So that's why there's a couple of extra people. Who have I missed so far, Sarah? Who else is online? I think that's all. If anybody else turns up, I will alert members and colleagues. I have had apologies from Councillor Price. He is now having to isolate, so he cannot be present with us today. Councillor Redrup has alerted to me to the fact that he will need to leave about 11:30. Yes, so our quorum is 3, so we've got a couple of spares at the moment, but please don't feel that you want to rush away early. The fire alarm has already been tested this morning, so if any fire alarm that goes off is a real fire alarm, and the exit is down those stairs. I'm sure people in this room are familiar with gathering outside. Remind me, where do we gather? By the police? Sorry? Out in the car park, yes. Yeah. Okay. Right, on to the formal agenda. So the first item of business is the minutes of the last meeting held on the 27th of September. Colleagues, are they a true and accurate record? I'll put that to the meeting that they are so. Councillor Stevens.
I'll point out on page 9, there was a resolved action point there that the chairman liaise with the chairman of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee to discuss the website component of the council's digital strategy. Can you tell me whether you've undertaken that and what's the outcome? Thank you.
Yes, certainly. And so Councillor Hastings and I did discuss that. It is actually now an item for the Corporate Scrutiny meeting on Wednesday, the 15th of December. As chair of the Audit Committee, I've been asked to attend to present Audit Committee's views. Obviously, Corporate Scrutiny members will be able to then delve into that and will make inquiries of Cabinet members as appropriate, I am sure. So, but yes, so that is going ahead. Any corrections or omissions that need to be added to? Otherwise, I'll put that they are true and fair record. Do you agree? I see hands. Yep. So they are correct record. Sign those now. Yep. Bear with me whilst I just sign those. So the next item of business is declarations of interest. Councillors, colleagues, do you have any interests to declare? Councillor Lilly. Councillor Stevens.
I'm on the local authority, or the LGA fire pensions board, and I'm also chair of the Fire Service Management Committee, and I'm also a member of the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Fire Authority.
Thank you. Anybody else? No. Okay. So the next item is public question time. Have we received any questions? No, we have not, and there is no one in the public gallery, unfortunately. So we can move on from that. So our we're on to the second page of the agenda. Item 4, the reports of the external auditor, Ernst & Young. There are three reports here. Audit results report for the Isle of Wight Council, for the pension fund, and then the draft auditor's annual report. I noted in reports that there would be verbal updates at this meeting in a number of areas, so we look forward to those. So I will pick up. Who is picking this up? Is it Helen? Yeah, are you picking up first for this?
It is, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Chairman, if you don't mind, I'll take the reports one at a time for ease of responding to any questions that members may have, and good morning to everybody. So taking the first item, which is the audit results report for Isle of Wight Council. At the last meeting, we advised that the audit wasn't complete and the key areas of work outstanding were in relation to the valuation of land and buildings, whether that's operational property or investment property, and work around the pension liability, which we also refer to as the IAS 19 liability. Pleased to say that in both those areas, the work is pretty much complete. We have had a number of discussions with our valuation specialists in relation to property, plant and equipment and investment property, but due to an unfortunate combination of circumstances last week, we didn't receive their report until Friday. So there is some work we're still doing to write that up. But Jason will take you through the updates that we have in the report and set out the work that's been completed. Subject to our final review of that report, though, completion of subsequent events and the final checks on the financial statements to ensure that all of the expected adjustments have gone through, we are hoping to sign an unqualified opinion on the financial statements later this week. So our intention is to, following the meeting this morning, where hopefully you will approve the accounts, which is a subsequent item on the agenda, that we will complete our work by the end of the week and be able to issue the opinions. So that's a brief introduction to that. I'll hand over to Jason for a moment and he will take you through the key areas of update.
Yeah, thank you, Helen, and thanks, Chair, and morning, everyone. Chair, as Helen has mentioned, there were a few items outstanding at the last meeting, so property valuations, pensions, and also going concern. So I'll just take members through those sections of the report those are the areas that we've updated. Just to start off by saying, currently, in terms of the main messages, the statement of accounts are unqualified and we have no matters to report by exception. So if members can turn to page 18 of the pack, Chair, bottom of page 18 and top of page 19. So our internal property team have completed their review and we are working through their report. But at this stage, we don't have any significant findings. All items that they have reviewed were within the expected range. However, we just looking through the report and seeing what the impact is on the rest of the items in our sample and in our population, because we've only sent them a sample of items, so we need to take into account any comments that they have and see how that impacts on the rest of the properties. Then on still on page 19, the third and fourth row down, the work on pensions and going concern is now complete, and we provide more detail in section 2 for the above areas, which I'll take members through now. If members could turn to page 26 of the pack, Chair. We've updated our conclusions on investment property valuations and operational assets valued at existing use value. The work is now complete, as we've already mentioned. We do, though, highlight some of the challenges we encountered in reperforming the valuations on car parks, but these were subsequently resolved. Our property team did have one comment. So you don't see this in the report, and this is part of the verbal update here. One comment on the valuation method for the town hall. The valuer, the council's valuer, used an existing use value method, whereas our internal property team felt a depreciated replacement cost method would have been more appropriate. This was the same comment that they had in the previous year, but because both last year and this year, the valuation still fell within the expected range. So the valuation is still materially accurate. That was the only comment on that category of assets. Then on page 27, the section relates to the operational assets valued at depreciated replacement cost. No significant findings to report, and we did highlight in the previous meeting the disposal error that you see on page 27, and that has been corrected by management. Turning to page 29, that's the work on pensions, which is now complete. So we mentioned at the last meeting that we had to engage our internal pension consultants due to a lack of access to the council's actuarial model, and we had to create our own estimate in order to satisfy the requirements of the new auditing standard on accounting estimates. And having gone through the exercise, that shows that the actuary estimate to be within a reasonable range. So the council's net pension liability is materially accurate. But that is an additional procedure or additional exercise we needed to go through to satisfy the new auditing standard. Then on the next page, page 30, that's going concern. We have now completed our review of management's cash flow forecast, and we were satisfied that the going concern assumption is appropriate for the council, and the accounts provide sufficient and adequate disclosure to support the going concern assumption. We then have on page 36, that's our draft audit report, and I just wanted to draw members' attention to page 36, where it speaks about our audit certificate. So we won't be able to issue our audit certificate as yet, as we still need to complete the whole of government accounts procedures, Chair, and we are still awaiting the instructions to complete this exercise, but we don't expect any issues in this regard because the council is below the threshold for the full procedures. So once we do receive these instructions, all we need to do is to complete the whole of government accounts return and then submit that to the NAO. And we use the figures in the approved accounts to complete that return, and then we just send it off to the NAO. Once that is completed, then we'll be able to issue our audit certificate, but we still plan to issue our opinion and our auditor's annual report, Chair. It won't delay any from that perspective. Then just lastly on section 4, page 38, there were no further misstatements identified and there are no uncorrected misstatements, Chair. That's pretty much all I was going to go through, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Jason. Colleagues, questions on this report? It seems there are none. Sorry. You do have a question, Councillor Lilly.
It was on page 15. At the bottom paragraph, it says, "We identified increased risk in completeness, accuracy, and purposes of information produced by the entity due to the inability of the audit team to verify original documents or reruns. So we undertake the following to address this risk." Has it been addressed? Has that risk been addressed, and how are we going to stop it not happening again? Because obviously that's a bit alarming. Thank you.
Councillor Lilly, thank you for the question. I think actually it's a standard risk that arose across all audits for the last 2 years, for 2019-20 and for 2020-21, where we have largely been completing the work remotely. What it means, where we use information produced by the entity, we need to carry out certain procedures under all circumstances, whether we're working on site or off site, to be able to confirm that the information hasn't been adapted or amended, whether deliberately or by error, or by some sort of IT transfer problem when we receive that information. We've flagged it in all of our reports for the last 2 years, just to say that that has been slightly more complicated than it would ordinarily be when we are on site. But it isn't a particular risk for this council. It's a risk to the audit approach in the circumstances under which we've been working for the last couple of years. As we move into 21-22 and carrying out the audit, subject to any other restrictions or changes in the wider circumstances that affect all of us, we would anticipate that we will be back to working in a more hybrid way, I suspect, partly on site and partly remotely, and therefore the risk associated with this transfer of information should reduce. But I think the key point to take from this is not a specific risk for this specific council. It is a more generic audit risk that we are addressing here.
Thank you.
If there are, Councillor John.
Chair, I wondered whether it would assist the committee if the auditors could circulate the valuations which will form the basis of the concluding elements of their report, the documents that they received and the valuations last Friday. I think that would be of value to us. It does represent a very considerable part of the asset base of the council.
Chairman, we wouldn't circulate the actual report received from our internal specialists. That's a report from our specialist to us as the audit team, and it's not something that we would share with the council. However, we will be updating this audit results report to include the final conclusions so that the council has and the committee has a report that sets out exactly the findings that we have and takes away any element of doubt around our conclusions on the valuations work. I hope that's sufficient.
How do you feel about that, Councillor John? From your cabinet member point of view, is that information that you would find helpful?
I think it's undoubtedly information that I would find valuable in my position. I think it's information the council would find very valuable to know. I appreciate that it was commissioned by the auditors of an external company. It is for the committee to decide on it ultimately here, whether you think it's material. And I understand that it's not ordinarily something that would be released, but it would be of great value.
And I can see that, and that could be for the committee as well. Perhaps this would be a usual situation, that something that the auditor has commissioned is not shared with the body which it is auditing, even though that body might find it useful and beneficial, and on an ongoing basis actually support further audit, perhaps.
I fully understand the point that's being made. However, you commission your own experts, your management experts, to carry out the valuations on your behalf, and that is the information on which you are making your judgments on valuations. We commission our experts to provide us with support, because I'm not a valuer, nor is Jason, and nor is anybody on our team, to give us support in challenging the assumptions used by your valuer in that. If we have significant concerns about the approach or the assumptions on which the valuation, your management expert has made his judgments, then we will include that within our reporting. And we have done so, as you can see, with our comments around car parking. And as Jason mentioned in his introduction, there will be a couple of further points that we will include into the audit results report. But the actual valuation report, the actual support that we receive from our specialists, we are specifically required not to share that report with councils. It is purely internal. However, we do share the conclusions and the judgments as part of our work. I think that would be fair to say, Jason, would it not? In that where there is a difference of opinion, we will discuss that both with the finance team and I believe with the management valuer as well.
Yeah, that's right.
So the information is shared with the council, albeit in a slightly different format. We can include more information into this audit results report if you think that would be helpful.
It's a curiosity. I can see of the audit process, and obviously being new to the committee, I've learned about. It sounds to me like if there is a difference of opinion, that comes out in what you report, and then there is a discussion around that. So if, broadly speaking, the two groups of commissioned evidence are in line with each other, the absence of comment allows us to feel content to some extent. But colleagues, do you want to add to that? Councillor Lilly?
I just think that obviously what we want to know as the audit committee, right, because in a sense we're the audit committee overseeing from the council, that if there are two different perspectives from valuation of something, that can create a huge issue in our accounts, and we need to know about it. So I think the key is obviously in your report, we need to know that if there are differences, and also whether our valuer and everything is not too far away from yours, because obviously if there's a big gap, this audit committee is about looking at the holes, and that's a hole. So from that basis.
So, and what I understand is if there is that big gap, that comes through in the commentary that the auditors give us. And so the absence of commentary probably gives us comfort. But it does seem to be a curiosity of the audit function that certain things are commissioned and are withheld until they have to be unwithheld in some way. But
I personally, and have been in business for a long time, the absence of comment is not a thing I particularly like. I'd rather say, a little comment, even there isn't much difference between us, right? But absence of comment always is a bit nervy.
I don't want us to bog down on this point, but Councillor Jarman, I'll allow you quickly.
Perhaps if we could have that additional detail which has just been offered, Helen, and if that could be expressed as a variance without releasing it. So perhaps if you could say that there's a 2% variance or a 5% variance, just to give us some scale, or no variance indeed, which would be ideal. So we have a scale of what sort of issue there is. The not knowing is the concern, and I'm with Councillor Lilly on this, that the absence of comment it can be misunderstood. So a percentage variance would help enormously.
Councillor Stevens, and then perhaps we can move this on a bit.
I'm moving on from the queries and concerns. Did you want to come back?
If you are moving on,
yeah, so I will wait. But I don't wish to join the team that are...
We just have a final wrap up on this point, and then we will.
Thank you very much indeed. I'll stay on the same page there.
Thank you, Chairman. I just really wanted to respond back in relation to the points made by Councillor Jarman and Councillor Lilly. I think if we had a concern over the valuation, I can assure you that it would be included in the audit results report. So I think that, for the avoidance of doubt, if we had any concerns that the valuations were materially misstated, it would be in the report. So within the report, as you have it currently, we have some concerns over, or not some concerns, we have pointed out that we have noticed a difference in car parking spaces. And as Jason mentioned in his reporting, whilst the value of County Hall is materially correctly stated, our valuer has a difference of opinion with your valuer over the basis of the valuation. So the value is probably right either way, but we would expect to see it valued on depreciated replacement cost rather than existing use value. In relation to whether we could actually give you variances, that would be tricky to an extent. If I just explain very briefly what we do, we look at the assumptions that your valuer has used in reaching his valuation. We then check that those assumptions are valid, both by making sure that arithmetically they work, but also to say, if we look at reliable third-party evidence, does that assumption look reasonable? Once we have done that, if we are within our normal materiality tolerances, so those are the ones that are included in the report, I believe on page luckily I've got it open, page 15. So if the difference between the value is below our audit differences threshold, which is 254,000 for this year, we won't report it. If we identify any differences above that threshold, those would be reported in the audit results report. So I fully understand the comment that is being made around the absence of comment, but those thresholds are there for a reason. And if we identify any differences in valuations above that reporting threshold of 254,000, it would be included within the report. So I hope, Chairman, I know you want to wrap that up, but I hope that gives comfort that we would be reporting to you any differences of that magnitude to this committee.
Thank you for that. Obviously, Councillor Drummond, as the Cabinet member, may explore those things. I should remind us all that he is not a member of this committee, although we are fairly relaxed in terms of who does speak and who does not. So he may want to further explore that. I think from a committee perspective, we'll take note of what you have said and perhaps have a discussion as to whether or not there is something that we can further explore there. But I am keen to keep us moving. So Councillor Stevens, who wanted to move us on anyway, you're up.
Good morning. Page 15 again, just to touch on the identification of an increased risk around the completeness, accuracy and appropriateness of information produced by the entity due to the inability of the audit team to verify original documents or rerun reports on site from the council's systems. I'm just concerned that you say there's an increased risk around the completeness and the accuracy of documentation or evidence that has been given to you. Can you give examples of why you feel that you should put that in the report, and also examples of the incompleteness of it, please?
Before I call in Helen, I'd just note that is an area that the Vice Chair was raising as well. So if there's something additional to the answer that you gave to the Vice Chair to help Councillor Stevens.
I may need to ask Jason if he can give a good example of a piece of evidence to maybe bring it to life for members if the previous answer wasn't entirely clear. So Jason, can you think of an example that we could maybe share on that one?
Yeah, sure. As an example, Chair, when we request a report from management to, for example, select a sample to test of a certain section, say, of income or expenditure, if we were physically present on site at the council, we would go to the officer, ask them to produce a report, and then email it across to us, and we would stand behind the officer and make sure that when they download the report, they don't change it or edit or modify the report in any way before sending it across to us. And then we would, in terms of our documentation, state that we've physically observed the officer downloading the report, not modifying it, and emailing it directly across to us. Now, with not being on site, that's proved more challenging. So we're highlighting the risk there, but the way that we've tried to mitigate the risk is to do the same process, but just via Microsoft Teams share, screen share on Microsoft Teams. So then we still physically view the officer's screen, viewing them downloading the report, and then viewing them emailing it to us directly. So that's the kind of risk that we highlighting and that we showing and demonstrating how we mitigate that risk, Chair. Hope that's an okay explanation.
Hopefully that helps you. Yes, basically a virtual version of somebody standing behind you, watching that you don't cheat on your homework or whatever. So, other questions on this, or can we move to the next report? I don't see any questions. So if the pension fund report, the next one.
Thank you, Chairman. I would hope that this one may be a little bit quicker to talk through, as the pension fund audit results report was largely complete at the time of the last meeting in September. To update the committee, we have updated our work, including around going concern disclosures, to ensure that it remains up to date. We have leveraged the work that Jason mentioned around the pension liability, so that's disclosed in the council accounts, because there is a similar disclosure under IAS 26, the international auditing standard on that, within the pension fund accounts. So we've used that work twice, once to provide support on the council, once to provide support on the pension fund, and again, that has identified no issues. So we are expecting to issue an unqualified opinion on the pension fund financial statements alongside the council accounts. As I mentioned earlier, we are hopefully going to do that before the end of this week. Happy to take any questions on this report.
Colleagues, questions? As we heard, it was largely completed by our last meeting, so I don't see any questions, so I think that allows us to move to subsection C, the draft auditor's annual report, who deals...
so
yes.
this is also
you,
me.
Yes. Still you, yeah.
So the auditor's annual report. This, for those members of the committee who may have been involved in previous years, this replaces the annual audit letter and is a new report provided under the 2020 National Audit Office Code of Audit Practice. Ordinarily, the annual audit letter was, broadly speaking, a summary of the audit results reports. This differs from that in that you will note there's a more extensive commentary in relation to our assessment of the proper arrangements the Council has in place to ensure economy, efficiency and effectiveness in the use of resources, so the value for money work, as we call it. The commentary within the report comes from the initial risk assessment that we carry out under the new code, and when we presented our audit planning reports to the committee in July, we confirmed that we hadn't identified any significant weaknesses in those arrangements. And so we didn't need to carry out any sort of deep dive work, for want of a better word, into any particular area. And the commentary then appears in the auditor's annual report. So the commentary has been discussed and agreed with officers with some minor changes to the wording. As we didn't identify any significant weaknesses, there's no particular areas of risk that we have focused on. You will note that we have called it a draft report. That's because we cannot finalise it until we've issued the audit opinions on both the council and the pension fund. But we wanted the committee to have sight of this at this point rather than holding on to the report to the next meeting. So our expectation is that, subject to any comments that the committee may have around the arrangements in place, once the audit opinions have been issued, then we would aim to finalise this auditor's annual report as soon as we practically can. The requirement is currently that it should be finalised within 3 months of us issuing the opinion. I wasn't going to say any more in terms of an introduction, but obviously Jason and I will always be happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Thank you for that. Certainly, I found this very useful reading, just as from the context of just being an elected member of this council, and understanding of the arrangements that we have from the perspective of you as auditors. It's one of those documents I will keep hold of just for my personal use. So thank you. I found it pretty clear. I did note the restatement, of course, about the comment you had made about the accuracy of our car parking data. So I'm sure somewhere in County Hall that's being looked at feverishly, particularly as car parking, of course, exercises the minds of the residents that we represent, possibly more so than many other things. But colleagues, any questions on this draft report? Councillor Lilly, yes.
Firstly, annual audits are always testing for different sides. So I'd actually like to thank the auditors and also Isle of Wight Council's team, Kerry, because audits are very painful exercises. They take a lot of resources, human resources and time, and to actually get the fact that you actually mentioned that these will be unqualified accounts. For years in my experience, that was always a kind of quality control kind of message, really. If you're unqualified, then actually you're doing a good job. So can I just make it note that we thank all the people involved, because it's not an easy thing to get through an audit. So well done. Thank you.
I'd certainly echo that, and I'm sure committee colleagues do as well. I think that deals with those 3 reports. Is there anything specific other than that, the fact that we've received them, that we need to do with them at this time? I'd see a shaking of head. So we have received them. Thank you very much for that. Which means we can move to item 5, the approval of the 2020-2021 final accounts. A testing amount of reading for us. I know nearly 200 pages if you add everything together. But very worthwhile. And with the press here, if they highlighted anything else from this, these are the things to look at if you are a resident who's particularly interested in how their money is spent, because it goes into excruciating detail in places about that. So again, one of those documents that really should see more light of day than perhaps it does. But Mr. Carpenter, are you introducing this for us?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So this report seeks approval for the Council Statement of Accounts for 2020-21 following completion of the external audit process and having due regard to the content of the external auditor's audit results report as part of the previous agenda item. So after considering comments from the auditors and making amendments as he felt to be appropriate, the Director of Finance and Section 151 officer has reconfirmed that he is satisfied that the Statement of Accounts presents a true and fair view of the financial position of the authority of the 31st of March 2021. And as you've just heard, the external auditor has stated that an unqualified opinion will be issued. So the Accounts and Audit Regulations 2015 as amended by the what we call the COVID regulations now require councillors to firstly consider the Statement of Accounts, secondly to approve the Statement of Accounts by resolution, and thirdly to ensure that the Statement of Accounts is signed and dated by the person presiding at the meeting. And following this, the council must publish the approved Statement of Accounts as soon as reasonably practical after receipt of the auditor's report containing the final findings, together with any certificate or opinion issued by the auditor. And we publish, our method of publication is on the council's website. So the Statement of Accounts for 2021 and the narrative report, which forms part of the statement, are shown as supplement item 5, additional expendices in the pack. So if there are any further questions at this point, then perhaps we can take them.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter. First, can I check, does the recommendation, which is on page 138 of our pack, capture exactly what you have just set out verbally that needs to be done at this meeting? So if we approve that recommendation, that captures exactly what's needed to be done. I ask as I was still wet behind the ears chair of audit, so you may need to handhold me through parts of this process. Colleagues, though, we've got hundreds of pages of fascinating reading, and I hope you were fascinated by it. Certainly keep it by your bedside if you are finding yourself slightly suffering from insomnia or needing some late night entertainment. But I reiterated, it's a vital reflection of what this council does in terms of money, and we cannot do anything without money. But colleagues, questions? The Vice Chair.
Firstly, again, can I thank the sort of staff team for all the work, because this is a very comprehensive document. And I think, as the chair has said, I think it's important for the people we represent, the community, and the taxpayer, that they have that detail with it. I suppose particularly on just page 10, I know that somewhere in this there's probably the various answers, but I'm going to focus on the 10. Obviously, in a sense, we kept to our budget last year, and in actual terms, there was an underspend, and that underspend has obviously gone to reserves. I just wanted to dig a little bit deep, particularly on children's services, that there was a variance which says 603 here, right? Which was like 603 100,000. Just an example, really. Why was there an underspend? Because obviously you have your budget figure, but you have your outcomes. Did we achieve all our outcomes? Because obviously children's services and children coming into care, etc. And it's the second probably biggest area of budget to adult social care. I just wanted to know a little bit more on that, really. Just an example, because sometimes underspending is not good. So I'd like to see, did we achieve all our outcomes for the money, and why was there an underspend? Is there something we didn't do? Page number 6, so no, page number 10 here. Sorry, I'm on the narrative. Sorry, I'm on the narrative. Sorry. Page number 10 of the narrative.
For clarity, that's the additional set of papers that were on our table this morning. So.
Sorry, that was more interesting than the other bit. Sorry. This morning, sorry, page 10, and then it's got the actual expenditure, revenue spending, and then you've got children's services, education and skills, and then you've got a variance of 603.
I'm ready to come back to you in a few moments, because I will need to look up another report to actually find out what the details
Okay.
before we come back to the council during for the outcome of the term 4 report. So I'll just go back and let you know.
Whilst that takes place, are there other questions on these papers? Certainly, whilst they're doing that, it's remiss of me, I should have said that the paper is in the name of the Director of Finance and Section 151 officer. He had indicated he would be here this morning, unfortunately, because we share him with Portsmouth. Portsmouth seemed to have something particularly important to discuss at a special cabinet meeting today, so he is not with us today for that reason, but I should note that he was intending to be here. But we do indeed have the very able Assistant Director of Finance as well as Mr. Carpenter here. So. If you can put your microphone on, sorry. It may be one of the ones that's failing to work today, so if you can find one. No.
Thank you. Okay, I found the details. So the 603,000 variance, it was mainly due to some savings that we made on the home to school transport contract. I believe we actually received a refund and we actually ended up paying less than was budgeted for on that contract during last year, and I suspect that was related to the COVID incidences. So it didn't impact on, it wasn't an underspend relating to the social care or the delivery of outcomes, just to fully answer your question.
Thank you. I won't dig anymore, but it's useful occasionally to dig. Shows that I'm awake as well.
Colleagues, any other questions? I can appreciate that because the reports are very, very detailed, that there probably isn't anything to raise a question from because they are so detailed. So if there aren't any questions, then I think we can move to the recommendation. I will move that from the chair, which is presented to you on page 138 of the main pack. It's option 1. That the 2020-21 statement of accounts be approved and the person presiding be authorised to sign and date the statement of accounts. So I move that from the chair. Is that agreed?
I second it.
It's seconded by the vice chair, so got a double whammy there. Is that approved by colleagues? That is unanimously approved. Thank you. And I now sign. Does the person presiding then get to be called Mr. President just for this moment? That'd be rather fun. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you indeed to all the officers, both of this council and those of our auditors. As the vice chair was saying, all of these processes of audit and accounts are, although they are part of your professional lives and why you are doing the work that you do, they are extraordinarily important. I know they come with great pressures. And it must have been even more pressure to do so in the last year and dealing with the difficulties of the ongoing pandemic. So you will know that the committee has is very grateful to you for the work that you do with such professionalism. Thank you. Which allows me then to move on to item 6, the reports of the Chief Internal Auditor. Lizzie is unfortunately unable to be with us today through ill health, but we do have Mr. Newton here to guide us through. So, Mr. Newton, do you wish to introduce anything? I know that you have a particular matter to raise with us.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I will do my best to answer any questions the committee has, but if there's anything I can't cover, I will feed that back to Lizzie and will provide you a response subsequent to the meeting. There's 3 reports today with the name of the Chief Internal Auditor attached. The first is the Standard Internal Audit Progress Report, which covers audits which have been finalised between the committee last met in September and early November. The majority of these are grant certifications, where the focus of internal audits work is primarily to confirm that the conditions of the grant have been complied with. Happy to take any questions.
Questions, colleagues?
Okay.
I don't see any at the moment, so if you...
Lovely. The second report is a high-risk report on, or limited assurance report on Technology Forge. I note that Chris Ashman, the relevant director, has just entered the room. So if there's any detailed questions on the follow-up to that report. I'm sure Chris Ashman would be happy to take them. I do have a short verbal update for the committee. When this report went to CMT, it was requested that we do a very, very high level follow-up to check on the progress with the actions which were agreed as an output of that report, although we will do a formal follow-up next audit year. I'll just read this update for committee now. Take my glasses off, I'm afraid. The full report for our review of technology fraud is presented today, rated as limited assurance. The report raised 4 findings with 8 linked agreed actions. Field work was carried out in early 2021-22 with agreed implementation dates for all actions of September 2021. While actions were not completed by September, we are pleased to report that progress has been made across all areas. Officers responsible are confident that actions will be completed by a revised date of January 2022, with formal follow-up by internal audit scheduled for early 2022-2023. Actions completed include discussions with procurement and the system vendor regarding normalised oversight for the existing system and moving to the current system version, potentially hosted in the cloud, and with IT confirming current technical continuity arrangements and initial discussions regarding scheduling a continuity exercise during 2022-23. As I said, I'm happy to take any questions on the content of the report, but regarding progress completing actions, we do have the relevant director in attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Newton. Are there any questions on this? Obviously, we've had this full report here because we chose as a committee to start bringing these back in their fullness to us. Councillor Lilly, you have a question.
Yes, I mean, obviously it's one of these things that's difficult to get your head round, right? And this might be my interpretation, so please. I mean, it seems that there's lots of different systems that bolted on into this, right? And on the IT, the property sort of side, and I just wanted, how is that fully going to be resolved? Because it comes over as quite complex, right? We seem to have had a system that is just, oh, we put another bit on it, we put another bit on it, and another bit on it, really. So how are we going to, because obviously this is extremely important, because obviously if it's giving us wrong information, that's not helpful. So that's my question.
If I could just talk specifically about Technology Forge. I mean, Technology Forge is a system which actually most councils use. I've carried out reviews at 2 of the authorities quite recently, and they also use Technology Forge. So I don't think what we're saying in the report is you can't rely on the information in Technology Forge. In fact, the audit focused purely on the technical arrangements to manage the system. So if I give you an example, one of the things auditors are very keen on is something called segregation of duties, which makes sure that any one personal team doesn't have too much control over a process. So with the technical side of things, what should happen is that if somebody in the operational team wants a new account created, they will then contact IT, and IT will create that account. IT don't have any other access to the system. One of the issues we picked up on is we can't give assurance over the segregation of duties because the technical responsibilities for granting and revoking access to the system are managed within the service area. Coming back to a point you raised about Technology Forge having things bolted onto it, could you clarify what you mean by that?
From what I gather is that there's a number of different sources of information that is actually has been added on over the years, right?
Not to my knowledge. I'm sorry if the report implies that to be the case.
So you're stating that basically it's one source. Huh?
Technology Forge is a single system. The issues are around how the technical processes are managed. So I think there were four main findings. One was around the management of the technical processes and the segregation of duty, which I was talking about just now. There's around continuity, so making sure that the service have got appropriate arrangements, tested arrangements in place if the system isn't available for a sustained period. Change control, and let me have a quick look at the report. So,
I'm waiting.
just bear with me 1 second. So, yeah, there's continuity, roles and responsibilities, change management. And the third one was around the interface with the vendor. So the lack of formality in the relationship with the vendor. And to be honest, we've used Technology Forge for well over 20 years. And I think it's just ticked over from year to year, and that formality isn't there, which we'd expect from an audit perspective.
So from your perspective, from the audit perspective, it is secure?
From an audit perspective, the operational elements, which were not in scope for review, we're not aware of any concerns. The concerns we have around the technical management, coming back to what you're saying about how secure it is, obviously you've got that segregation of duties issue. So there's a potential for unauthorised changes to be made to the system, but we're not aware of any, and we haven't identified any in the fieldwork for this review.
So it could be that if someone was very clever, they could do things inappropriately in our system, because you're actually indicating to me that it's not 100% secure.
The segregation of duties issue which is identified in here, and is a high risk finding. If you think about somebody who's got administrative access to the system, they potentially could make changes and then cover their tracks. I'm not saying they have, but I'm saying that potential is there, which is why you've got segregation of duties and why we've got a high risk finding identified in that. We'd like to see that technical responsibility sitting in IT, which would remove the potential for that to happen. We're not saying that has happened, but we're saying there's a risk and control framework which could enable that to happen.
So I presume you are going to put in place the proper procedures to actually stop this hole?
Management will respond to the report, and then we will follow up on that next year to see what they have done to address those issues.
Thank you.
Now, obviously, there are two issues of security there, one of which is hacking from outside, which is very much in the IT security side of things, and the other is misuse or abuse of a system, which is what I think you've been discussing more so there.
It's hosted internally.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And you said that you expect that the revised date for completion of all these actions is end of January 2022. So we have an audit committee in March 2022. We might hear some comforting words to confirm all that's done, and then you go through a follow-up.
The follow-up, we could request that we have an update from the service area in March, but audit will not be following this up formally till next audit year. So it will be done at the beginning of the audit year. So probably the first committee in 2022-23 will be able to report back on the results of our follow-up audit.
Okay.
Can I propose, Chair, that we ask for a report back?
You certainly can, but Councillor Stevens, you've been patiently brought
I have been patient,
proposals. Yeah.
very patient.
Councillor Stevens has it.
Virtually everything that I was going to make comment on, I believe Councillor Lilly has done, so I'm going to draw a line under that. I'll wait for the report to come back and the reaction to the action points that have been put forward, and quite possibly then I'll, from the audit next time, we'll evaluate the situation and see what's coming forward, and possibly even an element of scrutiny might be required onto this and indeed other bolt-on IT systems. Thank you.
Certainly, we have other places for scrutiny of matters. So, Mr. Newton, you wish to add?
Just wanted to follow on from Councillor Stevens' comment. This is unusual. The vast majority of the systems the council runs, so for example SAP, there's a very, very clear and clean segregation of duties, so that all of the technical access to the system is managed by IT who do not have operational access to the system.
I did note that on page 163 of the pack that you had noted that this is the only significant system left at the council known to be managed primarily within the service department, and that situation is being now addressed through, and has been, that is the process of internal audit. It brings forward these matters so that we can address them and have better practice. Colleagues, any other questions on these papers? Councillor Jarman, I'll bring you in.
Very kind, Chair, thank you. I think just to echo what Councillor Lilly started to raise is that we do have a very large number of bolt-on systems that have grown over time within our general IT platform. That's the way many IT systems grow. It's also probably well accepted that most people that might wish to compromise a system rarely enter by the front door, and it's the integrity of those other peripheral systems which is always of greater concern. I would, though, suspect that this is probably not directly an audit matter, but perhaps something that we could ask you to take away in your discussion with scrutiny as a joint issue, the wider issue of security and integrity of the IT platform in its entirety.
Certainly, as chair of this committee, I'm happy to do that. I do have a meeting with Councillor Hastings, who is obviously the outgoing chair of corporate scrutiny, given the change in circumstances. But I'm sure he and his successor will be interested in pursuing that line of inquiry. On this report, and otherwise it is to note, but Councillor Lilly has moved that, and I would second that. We will just receive an update that everything is proceeding smoothly there. But otherwise, colleagues, are you content to note the report and agree that there will be? I'll just take a show of hands on that. Councillor Redrup, Councillor Stevens, if you raise your hand, that's lovely. Thank you very much. That deals with items A and 3.
There's one more internal audit report.
The whistleblower report, yes. I just wanted to make sure we've dealt with A and B, yes? So we're now on to C. Yes, thank you for guiding me. So we have the annual fraud, irregularity and whistleblowing report. Is that you again, Mr. Newton?
So the final report under the name of the Chief Internal Auditor is the annual fraud and whistleblowing report. We bring this each year to this meeting of the committee, and it summarises at a high level the work which is being carried out regarding fraud detection, the prevention arrangements and whistleblowing. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. On page 173 of the pack, it refers to individuals being able to raise their concerns in a confidential manner. Can you confirm to me whether that is not, is that still an identifiable matter manner, or is it an entirely anonymous manner?
The main mechanism available to people who wish to raise a whistleblowing concern is an email address, whistleblowing@iow.gov.uk, and that comes through to an inbox which is monitored by myself and my colleague Amy Piner in internal audit.
So, of course, it would be an identifiable from a source.
If it came into us, then
yeah,
yes, it would be.
But so the person is not anonymous, but it is managed confidentially through you and your colleague.
That is correct.
I think I saw your hand, Councillor Lilly.
Yes, Chair, you started the question I was going to ask. It says on page 173 regarding this particular one incident, right? Following independent review, concerns were not substantiated. I presume that the identity of that individual was protected and no action was taken against them, because obviously if you use whistleblowing inappropriately, that can be a disciplinary issue. Hmm?
Yes, the investigation was led by the monitoring officer. We are within internal audit. We are obviously, you've got all the information in front of you, which I have regarding that incident. I don't have any more information beyond what you've got in front of you. So yes, it was struck with confidential.
So, if I may, I'll just explore that process a bit more. So, if someone emails through to you, it's highly confidential. The actual nature of the issues raised, does the person raising it, that's detached from the issue then? So it's then dealt with by another person. You mentioned the monitoring officer, without any sense of the identity or any identifying information.
Yes, that is correct. I mean, all internal audit do is act as a conduit. So we've got a confidential register, and we sort of enable people to raise concerns, but that's our only input into the process.
And that's very important, isn't it? Because people who do blow whistles on things will be naturally very concerned about the fact that they are doing so, and the potential for impact on themselves. So that the reason I'm bringing it out is to be absolutely clear that people can be confident about the process, and therefore if they do see something that they feel that needs to be addressed, they can do so at the time when they think it's the earliest opportunity to do so, because sadly we do hear of cases where it had whistles been blown earlier in time in other parts of the country, perhaps less serious consequences may have arisen from those. Colleagues, any other questions? The Vice Chair, we're doing a double act.
Yes, can I just add from that, because it does say implement a number of enhancements to processing. So obviously on this particular whistleblowing, there wasn't sort of concerns, they weren't substantiated, but obviously there is an outcome that has implemented a number of enhancements to the processing following the completion of the independent review. So what are those enhancements? What were those changes? Because obviously COVID related safeguarding concern is very high risk, isn't it? I mean, if you look in the high risk and later on in the report, the COVID situation is the number 16 is red, isn't it? It's very high risk. So obviously something came out of that review to actually improve certain things. So even though it wasn't substantiated, the review must have thought we do need to learn from this. So there were some lessons learned. What were those lessons?
I'm afraid I don't have any more detail than is in front of you, but I would imagine, I mean, it's going to be process improvements, so making sure things are done in a clear and transparent way so that it's demonstrably managed correctly, if you understand what I'm saying. So it was done, things were done properly, but perhaps it wasn't clear to all involved. I'm surmising here because I don't have any more information than you have in front of you.
Who would? Who would we are?
It was. We are lucky enough to have the deputy monitoring officer in attendance at this meeting. He may be able to provide. Hang on, I can see we've got the director of corporate services on the screen.
Who wants to defer to who? The deputy monitoring officer first, I think. Okay, so Claire Shan.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay?
I can certainly.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, obviously, with confidentiality in mind, as Gorent set out, I am aware of this particular incident that was flagged purely because of having the oversight for the monitoring officer and the human resource service function. So this was a matter that was raised by an individual member of staff who had concerns about some practices within their service area. The monitoring officer commissioned an external investigator to provide independence of review. That investigator compiled a report which was submitted to the monitoring officer, who obviously considered the outcomes of that investigation. And with the outcomes being anonymised, but obviously there were some lessons to be learned for the individual department concerned, and so that report went directly, not the individual report, but obviously the recommendations for improvements went to the individual service manager for follow-up. The individual whistleblower was kept up to date with the progress that was being made within the report that they had made, and whilst not necessarily always able to provide them with specific information, they would have been made aware of the recommendations that were being put into place to respond accordingly. I hope that gives some indication that obviously, firstly, the matters are treated carefully and with sensitivity, but also taken very seriously in terms of making sure that there's due investigation undertaken and any lessons learned as a result.
Thank you, Claire. And also, I think it's a good example of actual positive outcome. I think whistleblowing can actually improve things and lessons are learned. So, and I think particularly in issues like COVID, we do need staff that are perhaps raising issues and things. So, thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you for that. I don't see any other questions. The recommendation is to note the report, so we will have noted that. Thank you. Noted. Thank you. Yes. Which takes us to item 7, the half-yearly Treasury Management Report. Is that Jo Cook today?
Thank you, Chair. This is the regular half-year progress report on Treasury management activities for the half-year to the 30th of September 2021. The report itself has been produced in the usual format based on a template provided by our Treasury Management Advisors, Arlene Close, who also provided an external economic narrative. As indicated in paragraph 3 of the covering report, the Council has operated within the limits set out in the Treasury Management Strategy, which was approved back in March this year. Apart from 2 occasions where the limit on the operational bank account, this is the account that we use on a day-to-day basis, was actually breached. On both of these instances, as soon as it was realised, either the technical finance manager or the director of finance and section 151 officer was notified, and the balance on the account reverted to below the limit the following working day. In paragraph 12,
We have mentioned specifically that the Treasury management strategy also applies to the Treasury management activities of the pension funds. This is not explicitly stated within the Treasury management strategy, and up to this point has never been an issue. But as part of the current review of pension fund investment strategy, it's intended that during the second half of this year, we will be disinvesting £25 million from the investment portfolios, and these funds will be held in Treasury investments. This is so as we have access to the funds, because there are two portfolios where we are making regular payments to, so we need to have the cash available. And going forward, we will specifically mention this within the Treasury management strategy. Interest rates have continued to be very low, and as we obviously are not earning much on our investments, a decision was made that we would use the cash available to repay short-term borrowings as they fall due, and we will not look to reborrow at this point. At the moment, our spare cash is currently held in money market funds, and the rates on them is averaging about one basis point, which is 0.01%. So it's not an awful lot. The reduction on borrowings, short-term borrowings, has meant that we have been able to contribute to savings in interest costs of 1.4 million up to the end of September. There will be, this will change probably by the end of the year, and that will be included in the 21-22 budget review. The final, as you'll see on table 3 on page 183 of the pack, the value of short-term borrowing, which is all to other local authorities, has been reduced by 10 million in the first 6 months of this year. We did actually investigate last year the possibility of repaying borrowings early, but this was not actually greeted very well by the people we'd borrowed from, as they were obviously getting more from us than they were getting from their investments. So it's as they're falling due, they're just not being renewed. That's all I wanted to say specifically about the report, but I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you for that. Colleagues, do you have any questions? It does seem our Treasury management processes are working well. Obviously, they're important. They do contribute to the overall health of the budget as well. So, Councillor Bacon, we have a question.
I'm awake.
Sure of that. Always.
No. Just on the I think it's appendix. Could you just clarify the overall debt position? I'm looking at the paragraph on page 184. They're not numbered, but it's titled Other Debt Activity, and trying to compare that to the tables. And also not clear from the wording of that paragraph whether the PFI finance, etc., is included in that overall figure of 327. So borrowings and whatever else, what is the total debt the council currently carries?
The total value of the debt for the council, including the PFI liability, is 327.1 million. That's as at the end of September. There is 100.8 million of what we term to be other borrowings. This is borrowings outside of the Treasury area, so which would include the PFI.
Any other questions on this? Otherwise, we can note the report. The report is noted. So that moves us to the half-yearly procurement report. We have Hayley Holden.
Thank you, Chair. So here we have the half-yearly procurement and contract activity report. This report covers the period 1st of April to 30th of September 21. The report starts off by providing some context to the role of the procurement and contracts team within the council. It's important to note that commissioning decisions sit within the service areas, and our role is to work with services to take their service requirements and carry out a procurement process that is compliant with the relevant rules and regulations, and making sure that we're prompting all of the thoughts and considerations that we're required to apply where relevant and proportionate, such as social value, environmental considerations, equality and diversity matters, for example. We are starting to get a steer now about when we can expect to see proposed changes to the public sector procurement regime now that we've transitioned out of the EU. It's looking likely to be implemented early 2023 now. Cabinet Office is in the final stages of drafting the new regime based on all of the feedback that they've received following the consultation earlier this year, hoping to have sight of that over the next couple of months. Paragraph 7 of the report sets out volume of procurements initiated during the reporting period, and table 1 of the report breaks that down by directorate, and a comparison to the 2 previous reporting periods is also included. Shows that we've seen a general increase across the number of projects coming through the team from directorates. Paragraph 8 then shows the number of contracts that were awarded during the reporting period, and again is broken down for the committee by directorate in table 2. Appendix 1 also provides detail of each of those contracts by value and by directorate. The committee might just want to note as well that following some feedback I received during the preparation of this report, that going forward I'm intending to include a short description of what each of the contracts is, as I appreciate that the titles aren't always obvious, especially some of the IT ones. So this will feature in the next report that will be brought to committee. Paragraph 10 of the report gives an overview of the number of live contracts that we have registered in the contracts database, along with the combined total value of our contracts. That's whole life values that are quoted there, currently sitting at around 1.2 billion. Again, this is broken down by directorate. You will note high value of contracts sitting in the neighbourhoods directorate, and that predominantly features the PFI and the waste contract there. So paragraph 11 onwards, we have waivers of the council's contract standing orders. So this is where a service will put in a request to not follow the requirements of our contract standing orders as wholly prescribed. So this could be a request to waive advertising requirements, but to still retain an element of competition, or it could be for both. We also had a waiver during this reporting period, which was waiving the requirement to seal contracts valued over £250,000. So they're not always about doing away with competition and directly awarding contracts. That particular contract that I mentioned there was for utilities, and it was due to the speed of needing to agree the award based on rates that were tendered. We wouldn't have got it through the sealing process in time, so the waiver covered that one off. Committee will note we've had an increase in the number of waivers that have been reported, and that is broken down there in table 4, although value-wise we've seen another decrease from the previous reporting period as well. So the higher level of waivers that we are seeing, I think, is predominantly due to the work that we have done with our adults and children's social services around making sure that they've got a proper process to document off framework placements that are being made. So they each service area will have their commissioning routes, but if they can't find a suitable placement for a child or a mainland residential placement, for example, we need an alternative way of being able to document those. So we've been working with the service areas to get those accounted for, and that contributes to 21 of those waivers. We've also been busy with Regen Directorate, and some of those waivers are sole source of supply situations around electricity connections and things like that. So I think it's positive that these are being documented and reported in the right way, and that they are featuring in this report now. Details of each of those waivers also feature in a bit more detail in Appendix 2 of the report. Paragraph 18, we touch upon the procurement strategy, which is currently under review. The review is seeking to update and enhance the areas that are listed there in paragraph 20. Paragraph 22, we have an update on the contract monitoring system that we started to roll out earlier this year. We currently have 37 contracts in the system, which is an increase of 20 contracts during this reporting period. Appreciate that that may seem like a small number compared to the number of contracts that we have registered in the database, but of those 37 contracts, they have a combined total number of 1,014 performance measures. So we've started to tackle some of the bigger contracts that the council holds to get them there in the system and being monitored through that. Progress is slow. It was flagged in an audit that was done on contract management. However, it was agreed at the time that no additional resource would be allocated to the project. So we are continuing on with the resource that we have at the moment. All contracts being monitored in the system are performing well, so there are no issues to report there. It is also worth mentioning here that contracts that are not loaded into the system are still being managed. However, this is sitting within each service area and they are responsible for documenting and making sure that appropriate records are being kept to evidence this. We don't have central oversight at the moment of those contracts, and until we can start to bring them into the system, they won't feature in this report. So that's a sort of part of that rollout that I was just talking about. So next section of the report, starting at paragraph 30 there, just touches upon how we deal with modern slavery in our procurement processes. Commissioners are required to consider the risk of modern slavery being present in their contracts or supply chains, and we will work with commissioners to build in appropriate criteria into the supplier evaluation or the contract monitoring activities. We also cover off climate, environment, biosphere, starting at paragraph 37 there. Again, we will work with commissioners during the pre-procurement planning stages to make sure that commissioners are considering these matters and the appropriate criteria is being built in to either the evaluation process, specification, or into the subsequent contract monitoring activities. So that sort of covers the key parts of the report. So I'm happy to take questions at that point from the committee.
Thank you for that. The number of waivers, is that something that can be benchmarked against other authorities, or are the circumstances authority by authority so peculiar to each that there would be no way of sort of benchmarking and seeing if we are unusual in some way in the numbers of waivers, either by having too many, not too many, but a lot, or actually not a lot compared to another authority?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that we've done in the past. I don't know how easy it would be to get my hands on that data. It would need to be a comparable authority, obviously, but yeah, I mean, obviously all the waivers are very unique to situations relating to current circumstances that service areas might be in, existing contracts. If the committee think that that would be something worth looking into, then I'm happy to do a bit of research into how easy it is to get that information from other local authorities.
Personally, I think that would quite be an interesting exercise, but I wouldn't want it to be a huge priority because of the other work that you have to do at the moment. But it would be something worth trying to sort of just get a temperature test on whether this authority has any particular reasons for its number of waivers. That may be a small authority effect, or just the nature of being an island, or all sorts of things. Councillor Stevens, your hand was raised.
It was indeed, Chair. Totally agree with you. Whether it's 42 or the previous comparison data for quarter 1 and 2, 2020 to 21, you're talking a few £1 million here, and it's not just the number of waivers, it's the money that is going through without the procurement rules being followed through. I'm concerned about that.
Councillor Lilly, and then Councillor Bacon.
Follow on from Councillor Stevens, really. I think that the concern is that when you look through this, and I think from some other knowledge we have, that some of this is sort of gun to the head stuff, really, where actually we have to accept, and in particular, I think happens around residential placements of children and young people and mainland care, where actually suppliers can name their price. This is happening, and because we as an island, we do not have our own provision, and we have statutory responsibility. We have to literally, in this case, place a child, right, within that. I would like to see how we, in the long term, perhaps, you know, get the gun taken away, because it's an open checkbook in some cases, I think. And I know this is an issue across the UK, but that piece of water does actually give us an excerpt. We did some time ago, Chair, have Portsmouth University that was actually looking at the cost of that piece of water, Tekla. I mean, just for a member's knowledge, if a child is in Carlisle, which could be, I mean, I'm not going to name places because there are that distance, every so many weeks, a whole team of social workers, etc., has to go and visit that child. At the cost of the travel and everything, that is much more costly to any other part of the country where they have to place children. And also, some of the bigger authorities have a better relationship with those suppliers than we do because we haven't got the numbers. So within that, I just feel that perhaps we do need to dig down more. It might not resolve anything other than but at least we can know the situation more, and perhaps explore you know, some alternatives to that.
Certainly, and it strikes me that this is where perhaps the Policy and Scrutiny Committee under the Cabinet member more we can raise our interest in that area as an audit committee, but it does feel like something for the scrutiny function and the Cabinet member specifically at this moment.
Just supplementary to that then, Chair, could I propose that particularly on the children-related
if we come back at the end, yep.
that actually goes to, we raise this issue from this committee to the Policy and Scrutiny Committee for Children's Services.
Certainly. Councillor Bacon.
Thank you. I was going to raise a separate point, but just on that Portsmouth report, I recall that because I think that was the one that was commissioned when I was leader of the council. It basically showed, I think, a 7 million additional cost to the island purely by the fact we are not connected in any fixed way to the mainland, and the 4-mile crossing is equivalent to 70 miles of road in terms of cost, is the way it works out. So there's a specific cost there. Another question I wanted to ask was about paragraph 41, which refers to procurement decisions and says, will aim to minimise harm and to promote conservation of natural resources. Which of those is given priority? So is the priority consideration it will minimise harm, or is the priority consideration it will promote conservation?
So this is something that currently features in our procurement strategy, a commitment to do this. So it's very much for the commissioners to look at what they're procuring, goods, work, services, and to consider. I wouldn't say anyone has a particular priority. It's a prompt for commissioners to consider this in relation to their procurements and resulting goods, works, or services. So I know that probably doesn't.
Well, I think the emphasis might be interesting to drill down on, and maybe not here separately, but that you will often get a different result if you say what I'm looking in procuring this service is to promote conservation, rather than if your guiding line is I'm just seeking to minimise harm, and I would much prefer it was the first one, those two I mentioned, the promotion of conservation. So I'd just like to hear more about that in someday.
It is an important point, and perhaps one that can be steered downwards from Cabinet under in the end, as to because
I can
there
take
will,
it in.
there will be tensions there, and I'm sure the Cabinet member would wish to do that. But whether it's quite within what audit can look at within our remit, rather, but note will be taken of that point, Councillor Bacon, and we'll find a mechanism one way through or other through these through the committees and whatever to explore that. I'm sure. With that in mind, and noting the resolution of full council that poverty should be addressed as an overarching consideration in all activities, and look forward to hearing how the procurement strategy might evolve to explicitly recognise that aspect of the freshly adopted corporate plan. But, any other questions? Councillor Lilly has something to move, but any other questions on this report at the moment? I don't see any, in which case you just reiterate it was to...
So remind me.
Can you recall? Can anybody remind Councillor Lilly what he wanted to make?
I think it was to report back. My proposal was to particularly report back my proposal was that in regards to some of the children's services, we actually ask
that's it,
the
yes.
the Policy and Scrutiny Committee of Children's Services to would they sort of look at this issue, and I think there is a relation to the climate environment strategy, because if we have got children placed on the mainland, then the actual costs of staff actually visiting and everything does have an effect in their travel and costs to it. So
right,
I just feel that that is an area that should go. So my proposal is that
we make a request from this committee to the Policy and Scrutiny Committee for Children's Services that they consider this area.
That we raise this issue to them.
Colleagues, do you agree with that? Yes? Yes. Councillor Stephens, are you in agreement with us on that? Yes, he is. Thank you. Councillor Redrup, I note that you probably do wish to yes. Yeah, those are accepted and understood. Thank you. And
thank you.
Just to confirm that Councillor Redrup did raise that with me earlier as well. So, but we do manage to stay with court, which is good. So we have dealt with the half-yearly procurement report. We now have the Council's risk profile. Item 9. Mr. Martin, do you want to say a few words for us?
Yes, very briefly. Thank you, Chair. This is the third time the committee's viewed the strategic, sorry, a bit cold, my teeth chattering here, strategic risk register in this financial year. There have been some alterations to the format to provide the committee with more indication around dates where specific mitigations are due or when they will next be reviewed. Would like to reassure the committee that should those dates be changed, that will be indicated that it's a change, so that there isn't the possibility of effectively kicking dates down the road without an auditable decision having been taken to do so. We do intend to provide further incremental improvement to the format of the report moving forward in consultation with the chair of the committee. The committee will note there's only one score within the risk register that has changed in this period, which is a reduction in the risk regarding in-year budget, which is a kind of a natural cycle as you go through a year and become closer to the end of the financial year, forecasting no overspend. There is also an additional risk has been added to the risk register regarding business continuity. It's anticipated that the mitigations to that risk will further mature over the next few months in partnership with the Council's Emergency Planning Service, with ICT and with consultation with corporate management team. Following corporate plans publishing, the service planning now will take place throughout all of the directorates in the council, which will provide further opportunity to realign service level risks with the strategic risk register, and if there are to be changes to the strategic risk register, it will likely come from that exercise. So I won't say any more, and I'm quite happy to field any questions from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Just to inform the committee that he and I have had discussions around these incremental improvements to the way the register is presented as part of the overall review side of things. As I've said on a couple of occasions, I think there are ways of being clearer in terms of what is strategic mitigation, what's tactical, what is just information that's provided within these reports to support the statements that are being made and so on. So I'm sure over time I will become ever more pleased with the presentation of the risk register. Colleagues, any questions on this? Otherwise, our recommendation is to, I've lost my place, but is to approve that risk profile. Any questions? Councillor Lilly.
I suppose it's more of a point, perhaps it will turn into a question, but on page 217.14, additional demands placed upon the Isle of Wight Council and partners with COVID, flu pandemic, etc. So this is something we obviously have to live with, but I mean, a big area is obviously the welfare of our staff, and if suddenly we all get pinged, right, and you know, PCR tests, etc., we could suddenly be really depleted. I mean, this is happening in other industries and other sectors, and I just sort of, my question really is, you know, we've obviously got the incident response plan and the various mitigation within that. But what do we really do if in a couple of months the variant really puts us across and we've got half our staff actually off ill, which is not an unrealistic thing to say. Sorry to be a bit of a gloom on it, but I'm just trying to be a realist with it. You know?
I think Wendy is looking to come in, I think.
Wendy? Yes.
Thank you. I don't mind. It's a really good question, really, isn't it? I think that we have worked with consistently over the past 18 months, years. We, as an authority, undertake risk assessment for the delivery of service specifically related to COVID. We risk assess how to use our buildings, how services operate. You know yourselves the advice that we're giving to everyone moving around the building in County Hall is to wear masks, have the usual mitigations such as hand washing and sterile gel available throughout the offices and throughout all of our offices. I think what I would say to members, and in terms of this committee in particular, is that we work very closely with staff, with services, with our health and safety team to ensure that at all times our risk assessment and the way we work fully takes account of government guidelines on COVID and what we know and what we are learning about how COVID spreads. So at all times we are exceptionally cognizant of making sure that we take care of our staff and that staff understand how to operate as safely and effectively as possible so that we mitigate as far as we can losing staff to being either a close contact or being contracting COVID themselves. Thank you.
I mean, thank you. I mean, my only comments to that is our staff team must be exhausted. I mean, we're not talking, we're now talking 18 months in, and I think we have to recognise that people must be really exhausted now in that. But it's life, I suppose, is where we are.
In terms of the risk profile, it is a well-recognised risk and being properly addressed. So from this committee's point of view, we're looking at that and saying, does it is recognised and the mitigations are in place. One of those mitigations, as we're all experiencing at the moment, is the fresh air running through this room, and that might seem a minor thing, but if a member of staff needs to be somewhere where they consistently, though, find themselves very cold, that can be debilitating.
Well, can we from this committee thank our staff for actually getting through the last 18 months and actually making sure that our risks are mitigated and through that. So I think we should minute a big thank you to that team, because if they didn't come, then we wouldn't have a council.
Indeed. So that will be minuted. Any other questions on this? Otherwise, the recommendations that the strategic risks of the council was set out in paragraph 13 and appendix 1 be approved at this time?
Yep.
Otherwise, yes. Councillor Stevens is happy. Yes, that's unanimous. Thank you very much, Mr. Martin. I look forward to my further discussions with you over time. Myself off. Which takes us now to future external audit arrangements from 2023-24, page 249. I had a discussion, a briefing from the Section 151 officer on this, and he, after I'm certainly in line with him on terms of what he was recommending. I asked of him a few questions, and I'm even more comfortable with what he's recommending. So, but first, before I move that recommendation, does Ms. Hubbleday, do you want to introduce it in any particular way, and then we'll move on?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this report is regarding our external auditor arrangements from 23-24. So our current arrangements continue up to the audit for the financial year 22-23, and then we need to go into another arrangement for the next 5-year period. The committee is asked to recommend to full council that the council accepts a public sector audit appointments invitation to opt into the sector-led option for the appointment. That gives us access to the top audit firms. It gives us a approach where we're likely to achieve the best value for money, and it is the actual recommendation of the LGA as well. So this report is will then go on to full council for their decision. We have to opt in to the arrangements by the 11th of March. So this is the first step in that process of recommending to the audit committee that they make that recommendation to full council.
Thank you. Any questions on this? It does, certainly from my discussions with Mr. Ward, it seems the most sensible approach for us as a committee to recommend to full council. It will secure the best value for money and the best available expertise as well. I think it's not just how much it costs, but what you get for your money as well, from what Mr. Ward was outlining to me. So if there are, you have a question?
No, I was going to go straight to a proposal to actually propose option 1.
Okay.
I'm looking for a seconder.
Councillor Bacon seconds. So the option before us is that it's option 1 that we recommend to full council. The council accepts public sector audit appointments, invitation, etc. As on the paper. Those in favour? That is unanimously agreed. So that's what we recommend to full council. So, colleagues, that then gets us to just noting our work plan. Anything that you wish to note about that, or believe that this committee should be further having in mind for our work plan over the coming months? Noted otherwise. Obviously, raise anything outside of the committee as well on that. Members, question time. I'm sure you've got a long list of questions you wish to put right now. In these temperatures. Yes, I carry my chemical laboratory thermometer with me pretty much at all times outside of these meetings. I wish I'd brought it today. In that case, I will be closing the meeting at 11:50. Thank you so much to everybody who has attended this morning. Go and warm up. Thank you to all those who have joined us virtually as well.